Hello and welcome to this event in our Social Sciences Occasional Lecture Series. And my name is Nina Rosenstand and I teach philosophy here and I chair the series. So now I am very, very pleased to be able to introduce our speaker for today, Mary Gwin. And Mary Gwin is our one of our new much anticipated and very, very welcome professors of philosophy here at Mesa. And so this is a way for me to introduce Mary to everybody. Her PhD is from University of Oklahoma, and it is in philosophy, obviously, so she's a professor of philosophy here. And she is teaching philosophy of science plus a number of other subjects here at Mesa now. And she has a paper coming out pretty soon on chemical kinds in Southwestern philosophical studies. And among her interests are indeed ethical treatment of animals and philosophy of science. And I want to welcome Mary Gwin.
Thank you, Nina. And thank you for coming out today for my talk. Can you hear me? Is my audio good? Okay. So this is the title of my talk, but today I have a very specific argument that I'm going to give, and I'll have the argument up in just a minute. But this is a basic outline of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to start out with some background about why I'm talking about this, and then I'm going to talk about what companionship is and special obligations. And then at the very end, and this perhaps could be the most controversial part of my talk today, I'm going to offer up some suggested obligations that I think we have to our companion animals. And when we get there, we'll talk about maybe whether or not it's controversial. But background and motivations for this talk. This is a new-ish area of research for me. I've done some work on animal ethics because I've taught a class on animal ethics for a few years now, or I used to teach a class at my old school. And it was a general survey of different views on the ethical treatment of animals in different situations. So animals raised for food versus companionship versus research, etc. And so, but tied to that, and along with my personal experience, I taught that class at an agricultural school, and so my audience was mainly ag science students who were going to school to get jobs in the agricultural industry. And that was a labor of love for me to, at least, I didn't ever feel like I was going to convert anybody, but I thought, this was an opportunity to at least expose these young people to these ideas that maybe, they'd never heard of before, or they had been given misinformation about. So that's a little bit of the background and motivation here. Also, I worked at that school for 10 years, and being the ag school, it was also the veterinary science school. So I had the opportunity to make a lot of friends who were veterinarians. And I learned a lot about veterinary medicine, the practice, and what veterinarians go through when they practice medicine. And I heard a lot of stories over the years about different situations. One in particular, a friend of mine was working at the hospital, the school vet hospital, on a Saturday, and this family stopped. They were moving from Texas to Colorado, and they stopped at the vet med school to have their large pit bull put down because they didn't want to transfer this dog anymore. So they had packed the dog up along with everything else, the kids in the house, and got halfway to wherever they were going, I think it was Colorado, like I said, and decided that they didn't want to transport this large animal anymore, and took it to the hospital to have it put down. And my friend, he was a student veterinarian at the time. He did this. He had to do this. But we talked about how that made him feel. And veterinarians, they have high rates of suicide because they do have to put animals down, and sometimes they put animals down for reasons that they don't think are necessarily right. So that's also part of it. And then also up here, I have legal considerations. Now, some of you may know this and some of you may not know this, but there are federal laws in place to protect animals for research and for food, but there's nothing federal, there's no federal law in place that protects companion animals, right? That's state by state. So for example, here in California, there's some pretty good laws in place protecting companion animals as property to humans, right? And so there's misdemeanor punishments, and then there's felony punishments, but that's state by state. So if you go north to Alaska, they only have misdemeanor punishments for animal abuse. And again, right, companion animal abuse, and any companion animal protection is treated as property, human property under the law. So right, legal considerations, our laws reflect this, this attitude that, we don't owe as much to our companion animals as we do, to maybe the animals that we raise for food or other human beings, certainly. And then the last point I have up here as a, background point or a motivation for doing this is just the science. And this is a reference to, I don't know if you heard about this or if you remember it, but it was just a month ago. It was all over the media about the dogs. They measured brain activity in dogs and found that not only can dogs recognize words, but they also respond to the way we say the word. So you can say good and they know the word good, and if you say it in a soothing, pleasing way, they recognize that. And they were, scientists were able to measure that. And this is just a reference to that, to what that, this is the article, right, that work, yeah, that's the article. Anyway, so all of that to say, our science says that, animals have a lot more going on than we used to think. And so, right, those are my background, and that's my background and motivations. And here's my main argument. So my main argument that I'm going to give is that given the special nature of our relationships with companion animals, we have special obligations to our companion animals that don't obtain for other non-human animals. And I have in parentheses there, they could obtain. So I'll leave that open. And I don't have much, to say about that today, because I'm mainly concerned with the special obligations to our companion animals. And again, right, since we don't have, laws that necessarily cover, these obligations that we think we have, right? This is why it's important to talk about when somebody comes up with an idea that we do have special obligations, right? That's why it's important to talk about it. So that's my main argument. And then I guess I'll go ahead and get started. And one of the things I want to say, start out with is, right, talking about what kind of animal a companion animal can be. I tend to be mammal-centric. I tend to like the furry, cute, things. And I'm a cat person. So I tend to think of, companions as those kinds of animals. But my experiences with students in ag industry and with, various friends is, people report that they have special relationships with all kinds of species. Now, there may be a limitation, right, when the further down the cognitive functioning chain, there may be some limitations there, but I leave it open, that potentially any kind of animal, could be considered a companion animal. It doesn't have to be a furry, cute, puppy or kitten or dog or cat, right? It can be, a snake. I've had students who had snakes and they report that, they feel, a bond to these animals that I wouldn't feel, but, I've actually, this is anecdotal, but, I've actually witnessed, a bearded dragon who, the bearded dragon's owner said that, you know, this animal like loved it, and I said that's not possible. You know, this is a reptile. You know, and I actually witnessed this, that this bearded dragon responded to this human being in a way that it wouldn't respond to any other human being. So I mean, you know, I leave it open as to, there's even, you know, I think fish there, right? So it could be fish if the fish meets certain conditions. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So what kind of animal can be a companion animal? Any kind of animal. I'm leaving that open. What makes a companion a companion? Well, typically, you know, some aspect of friendship. And this is just, right, a list of words that came to my mind when I was putting this PowerPoint together. So friendship might mean closeness in terms of proximity or intimacy. Definitely means affinity or sometimes even utility. And that's just off the top of my head, common sense, intuitive notions here. But when you're a philosopher and you talk about friendship, you got to talk about Aristotle, right? Because Aristotle is the guy who tells us, right, what he thinks friendships are. And I have a handout, and if you've got a copy of the handout in front of you, I've got some quotes on there's a page that says short-term friendship at the top in bold. The short-term friends, according to Aristotle, are right, the friends of utility and pleasure, right? So these are friends that we make, that we might make, and the reason why it's short-term is once the utility reason is gone, then we're no longer friends with them. So think, right, about friends that you make in classes that you take, your study buddy, right? So you study with this person, and then once the class is over, you don't study together anymore, but you might like each other, right? And you might get along and everything, but once the class is over, you know, you don't have any contact. So that would be like a friend of utility. Or, you know, a friend of pleasure, you know, a friend who you like because maybe the kind of car that they drive or something like that. And then once they lose the car, you don't like that person anymore. That's a friend of pleasure. And this is why I think Aristotle rightly calls that an incomplete friendship. It's not the kind of friendship that's going to necessarily last, stand the test of time. But he's got this view that there is a kind of long-term, what he calls a complete friendship. And that's a friendship of virtue. But before we jump on board with that notion, those are really rare. You've got to have two virtuous people. And Aristotle says that, you know, that to be virtuous, he's got all these conditions on being morally virtuous. It's really hard to be a virtuous person on Aristotle's account. So the virtuous, the complete friendship is the friendship of virtue. Now, the thing we're going to borrow from this, and what I'm about to talk about, is that one of the things that virtue friendships have is that they, the virtuous desire the good for the other for their own sake. Okay, so in other words, in a virtuous relationship, if I have a virtuous friendship with you, then I desire your good for your own sake, not mine, right? So that might mean what's good for you is going to make me really sad. Maybe it's really good for you. Maybe we're really good friends, and it's really good for you to take this job across the country, right? If this is a virtuous friendship, that means that I have to accept that. That means that I desire your good for your own sake, right? Even if it hurts me. And that's how virtuous people treat each other. So we're going to borrow that idea, but we're not going to use the whole idea, because if you drop down on this same handout, Aristotle has this other notion of friendship called the friendship of unequals, right? And this is what I think the relationship between humans and companion animals is, right? So Aristotle talks about, you know, these are, in that quotation, Aristotle talks about these are friendships that are based on some kind of superior relation. And he gives some examples, right? Father, son, older person, younger person, man, woman, right? So Aristotle's really sexist, and we got to ignore that part. But Aristotle, right? He says, you know, look, there is this other kind of friendship, right? And it's based on superiority, and it's a friendship of unequals. And the thing that I think is important here is important for what I'm going to say is that at the last two lines, for each of us, these friends has a different virtue and a different function, and there are different causes of love. Hence, the ways of loving are different, and so are the friendships. Now, that means, right, that a human being, if I'm going to use it for what I want to say about the relationship between humans and companion animals, is that means that a human being can love a companion animal in a way that the companion animal can't love back. So it doesn't have to be, we love each other for our own good. I may say, for example, and honestly believe of myself, that I love my cat for their own sake. I wish, them the good. So for their own sake, even if it hurts me. So because I want my cat to be healthy and not suffer, right, I will spend money to take it to the vet and feed it, quality cat food, right? But I don't have that expectation of my cat to do that back to me, right? So this is a friendship of unequals, and I will say that I'm in the superior position, right? So I'm not making an argument from equality here. I'm saying I'm in the superior position. This is a friendship of unequals. So, and I have up here, if you drop one more down, one more Aristotle quotation, right? Aristotle's view on the role of animals, I just want to make this clear, because Aristotle would disagree with everything I'm saying today, I think. And his own view is, probably familiar, a lot of people, maybe not in this part of the country, but where I'm from, the Oklahoma, Texas region, right, a lot of people are really familiar with this view that animals are here for human purposes, right? So I'm sure you've heard of it, you may not agree with it, but, but that's Aristotle's view, and so that's that last Aristotle quote on the handout. But anyway, so Aristotle's friendship of unequals, right? We're going to take that and we're going to make this argument, or I'm going to make this argument. We need friends. And one source of friendship for humans is found in the interactions that we have with non-human animals. Regardless of pleasure or utility to the human, the companionship that a non-human animal offers a human is sufficient to qualify the relationship as a friendship of unequals, right? So regardless of pleasure or utility, right? I get a lot of pleasure out of being a cat parent. They give me a lot of joy, my cats. But regardless of that, I think that this is that given the special relationship that we have, the friendship that we have, that's enough to say that this is one of those friendships of unequals. Now, if that's right, then we've got to start thinking about, right, conditions on friendship. What does it mean to be a friend? And so here's just a list of potential conditions from Jeske, who, right, she's talking about conditions on friendship between persons, right? So, right, one of the conditions is that the persons involved have a positive attitude towards each other. And so by positive attitude, it could be love, it could be like, it could be, just a general fondness for whatever, right? But the persons involved have to have a positive attitude towards each other. Also, right, there has to be mutual awareness of the positive attitude. So it doesn't have to be reciprocal, but right, we have to be aware that we like each other. So I might like you from afar. So condition one, right, I might like you from afar, and you might like me from afar. But if we're not aware of us liking each other, we're not friends, right? So right, those are two potential conditions, and I should pause for a moment and say, be careful not to read these as too much like necessary and sufficient conditions, right? Because that's not what she says, and it's not what I think either. This is more of a cluster concept situation where the more you have these, right, the more like a friendship you have among persons. But okay, so right, first two conditions, special concern. Well, it seems like, if we're going to be friends, we have to show special concern to each other that we wouldn't necessarily have, right, for just anybody else. So, I have a general concern for humanity. I don't want anybody to be harmed. But if you're my friend, I might have some extra concern that you're not harmed. So, I don't wish ill on anybody in the room. But somebody I consider my friend, right? I would, I really have a concern about, did they make it home safely from the talk today? So, for example, I don't know many people in the room today, but the ones I do know, I have that special concern for your safety. So, special concern, desire to spend time together, right, or to share time together. Now, this could be among persons, right? This could be physically, but also, right, it could also involve, technology and remotely. So it may be the case that we never get to, I have a human friend that I never get to be in the room, in a room with, but we're good friends and we develop a relationship right over, through emails or, online somehow, right? Or people, I don't do games, but, people who game make friends, right, in, gaming that way. So, right, but that's a kind of sharing time together, right? Causal interaction. That's another condition on friendship, right? We have to be able to interact in some way. It might be that our interaction is online. If we're humans, right, we interact with each other. We may never physically be present to each other, but we interact, through emails or games or whatever. And then the sixth one up here, a shared history. So there has to be some kind of history that supports that the idea that we have concern for each other. It doesn't have to be very long. Once you consider someone a friend, right, it could be a new friend, right? But you have some kind of shared history where you've interacted and there's some kind of evidence that you actually have concern for each other. And then the last one, right, you have a desire to know each other through some kind of direct contact. And by direct contact, it could be, through emails if you're humans, or, games or discussion boards or whatnot, right? So these are some general conditions on friendship that Jeske, put this list together. And I think they're good for us to start talking about how we might be able to use these for companion animals, right? So, right, think about the way companion animals regard their human companions, right? We might have positive attitudes of, I'm very fond of my cats, and they're, fond of me in some way, right? I hesitate to say, Jeske says that this is a necessary condition for persons, this one right here. I hesitate to say that for human, non-human animals, right, that relation, because I'm not sure, right, if my cat is fond of me. I'm not sure. I mean, there's behavioral evidence, and I'll talk about that in a second. But, I've had, one of my closest companions, it seems like if she liked anybody, she liked me, but she didn't really like anybody. So, and if you have cats, you know what this is like. You know what I'm talking about. So but still, it's useful. A positive. She didn't run away. She never tried to bite me. If that counts as a positive attitude, then we can count that, right? And she let me take care of her, right? So I hesitate to go full on with what Jeske says. She says this one is necessary. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, these are still useful, right? These conditions on friendships between persons, right? Useful for my purpose of extending the relationship of friendship of unequals over to humans and non-human animals, because all of this does seem to fit on our end, right? We do have desire to share, time with our companion animals. We do have a special concern. We do, share history once we consider them companions, right? And it seems that, if you are willing to, broadly construe these notions, that they can do this back to us. Maybe not all of them, but, for example, desire to share time together. So my cat, right, he when I come home, he will greet me at the door, and he will make noise at me, and he will want to sit in my lap. And so that is an indication that this animal, likes me, right? That's an appeal to behavior, but also we could call that, a desire to share time with me, right? And also, that I've been told that when I leave the house, the animal, meows throughout the house and looks for me, right? So perhaps the animal is aware that, I think this, I'm trying to keep this vague, and open, but I really do think this cat, right, misses me when I'm gone. So, and the behavior indicates that. So like I'm saying, these conditions on friendship between persons, right, it's not too much of a stretch to say, okay, well, if we construe them broadly enough, they carry over, right, to, the relation between humans and animals, that kind of friendship. So, okay. So what's in it for them, right? What if we're talking about friendship, what do they get out of it? Well, some obvious stuff. Positive attitude, special concern. When I have a companion animal that I have a positive attitude towards, and I show special concern and I have the desire to learn more about them, then, they benefit because they get, in my house, they get health care, they get, toys to play with, they get, a nice place to live, they get food. And, a lot of people in the world don't get that. And we'll talk about this in a minute, because that might be a problem for this. That might be a problem for my view. But, they get a lot out of it. If I consider a companion animal, to be a friend, what's in it for us? Well, often we'll talk about how people with companion animals will talk about how they feel love back from the animal. I feel like, my cat genuinely loves me as much as he can. The cat I mentioned before who, she didn't like anybody, but if she liked anybody, it was me. I felt like in her way, I was loved by that animal. Evidence of concern, right? So, the cat that I currently have misses me when I'm gone, right? And to me, that's evidence, or I think he does anyway. And to me, that's evidence that, right, he is concerned about me. Do I think that they had, desire to know about us, or that they want to share time with us? Well, maybe. One of my problems here is, because, I'm appealing a lot to, anecdotal behavioral evidence. And, right, and so one of the problems is that, I run the risk of anthropomorphizing these, animal behaviors. And, I think, that's something that I need to pay attention to, but I also, here's another thing. My human person friends, how do I know that they're really my friends, right? That's a problem that we have, when we think about friendship in philosophy, it's a problem that we have to address, is how do we know, that this other person, it's not just behavior on their part, that they genuinely feel friendship towards us, right? So I'm aware of the problem of anthropomorphism, and I realize that, that when I appeal to the behavioral evidence, this isn't, like I'm saying, I'm not saying that it's that this is conclusive evidence, but I'm saying, yeah, this is what it appears to me and, a lot of other people. Also, right, you might pick up on, the research in cognitive ethology, right? And the problems there, right, the people who deny, animal consciousness, my genuine sense, though, is that is no more. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, let me just explain. For a long time, the view in animal science even was that animals don't have consciousness. So, right, and philosophers in the room are familiar with this. Descartes is famous for, he was a famous modern philosopher, and he was famous for doing these experiments on animals, and he would perform vivisection on them. Like he'd cut them open, and if he wanted to study like how a heart functioned, he'd cut the animal open and look at it, look at the beating heart of these dogs. This is what he did. And his justification for that was that animals didn't have consciousness, they didn't have mind. They were just all body. So cutting a cat or a dog open is like opening the hood of your car. And so whenever you, on Descartes' view, right, whenever you cut an animal open and it reacts, it screams or whatever, that's like the alarm on your car going off, right? It's not a genuine expression of pain or suffering or anything, right? But it's a bodily reaction, and the word for it is nociception, right? And so that was kind of the view in animal science for a long time, that animals don't have consciousness, they're not aware of really what's going on, they're just bodies reacting to stimuli in the environment. And my general sense is that attitude is changing, and I can tell you in animal science it really is. There's a contemporary animal scientist that some of you may have heard of. Her name is Temple Grandin, and she's famous for a couple of things. One thing she's famous for, I think there was a Lifetime movie about her autism, right? She's this autistic animal scientist out of Colorado State. But another thing that she's famous for is for redesigning slaughterhouses for cattle. And she got this idea to do the redesign because she says her autism makes her see the world in the same way that she thinks cattle see the world. And so she redesigned came up with this redesign for cattle house, or the slaughterhouses for the cattle, based on that. And it reduces the wait time that the animal has to go to slaughter, and it takes away, I'm trying to remember, it takes away some of the distractions that the animal can face, and she says that causes the animal to stress out. And so I'm telling you that because, like I said, my general sense is that, this idea, even though, right, this is still a problem if you appeal to cognitive ethology, right, some people will still say, well, non-human animals just lack consciousness. They lack awareness. They're not really suffering. I think this is generally like not so much an issue anymore. But again, though, right, this problem, our only access to mental states is behavior. All we can do is look at the behavior and then interpret that. But that's what animal scientists do. Temple Grandin looks at animal behavior, and then, right, when she does her work on animal emotions, she does that, looks at behavior, and then, right, concludes that, this is the subset of emotions that an animal can have. So, what's in it for us? Well, a lot. Now, special obligations. I need to talk about those because, right, we don't necessarily know what special obligations are. So special obligations are obligations that are owed to subsets of persons, right? So nobody says we owe these, except for me today, right? Nobody says that we have special obligations to non-human animals. These are to be contrasted with natural duties that we might owe all other persons. So for example, let me give you an example among persons. I might have a natural duty to not lie to you, right? Or to keep a promise to you, right? That's a better example. So I might have a natural duty to keep my promises to you in virtue of the fact that you're a person, right? And if you're a Kantian, if I lie to you, then, or if I break my promise to you, then I am disrespecting you completely, right? So Kantians are very, clear about this, that, we're never to break our promises to other rational agents. And as being a person, you're a rational agent. So right, that's a natural duty that I have. Now, right, a special obligation, right, in contrast, is a special obligation that I owe you in virtue of some other thing, right? So and there's different, examples, right? Family, colleagues, other professional relations, friends, right? So for example, I might have a special obligation to my family or friends to spare your feelings, right? So I might have a natural duty to keep a promise, right? But on the other hand, right, I might have a special obligation to spare your feelings, right? And the special obligation to my family or friends, I might not have the same special obligation to spare feelings to my colleagues, for example. So I don't have the same kinds of obligations, right? The same kinds of special obligations. Give care is another one, right? So I might be, I might have a special obligation to my family or friends to care for them when they're sick, but if you're my colleague, I don't have that special obligation. But if you're my colleague, right, I might have a special obligation to you to, cover your class if you're sick or something like that. Also, right, some other exemplar professional obligations, I just put a few up here. Human doctors, right, we're all familiar with this one, do no harm. That might be considered a special obligation in virtue of the fact that a human being goes into the medical profession to treat other human beings. They agree, right, that they have this obligation to do no harm. Teaching, right, I have, as a professor, I have a special obligation to my students, right, to grade them fairly, right, that I don't have to other people. If you're not my student, I don't have to grade you fairly. Right? So, suppose, right, I'm the judge in a pie eating contest and my kid's one of the contestants or something like that, right? I don't have to grade them fairly, right? But my students at school, I have to grade you fairly. And then here, this is actually, I lifted this from the oath that veterinarians take when they graduate from school. And part of it is to prevent and relieve suffering. Right, so a lot of people, right, you may or may not know this, but right, human doctors who treat human patients, right, have to, in the Hippocratic Oath, they pledge to do no harm, but veterinarians, right, they pledge to prevent and relieve suffering. So this is the difference between, right, this is why, human doctors can't kill human beings, but veterinarians, right, can. Right, or not kill human beings, sorry, can kill, right, non-human animals. So anyway, so examples there. Okay, so some problems, and we're getting close to wrapping this up. So there's some potential problems for the special obligations view that I need to make you aware of, because this isn't, special obligations, it's a really common sense, intuitive notion, right? So if you're not a philosopher or you've never taken a philosophy class, right, you may be going, well, duh, of course I have special obligations to my family, or of course I have special obligations to, my cat or whatever. It depends on what your view is. But look, right, I'm with you that, it's really common sense, it's really intuitive. But if you are a philosopher, you have to take into consideration, right, the grounds for these things. And you have to address, like, potential objections from, say, consequentialism. So consequentialism, just generally in ethics, is the view that what makes an action morally right is the consequences that it brings about, right? And consequentialism and deontology, by the way, these both aim at impartiality. But the way a consequentialist, right, argues is that, right, by one version of consequentialism says that you ought to maximize the good, right? And you have to maximize the good for the greatest number, and that's supposed to be distributed impartially and equally, right? But if I have special obligations, then that violates that principle of impartiality. So, right, then what do? Do you, right, get rid of consequentialism, or do you get rid of this notion of special obligations? Are we wrong, which one are we wrong about? So this is a potential problem for special obligations, right? I'll just tell you what I think about this. I think that consequentialism is more, there are certain situations where we need to maximize the good, but it's not the kind of thing that you can apply everywhere. And so to every moral case. So, right, there are situations where we need to be impartial and distribute, goods and justice and things like that impartially, but there is room for special obligations, I think, in our morality. Deontology, just in case you're not familiar, right, deontology is the view in ethics that says what makes an action morally right has to do with the duties or the moral duties or moral obligations that we have, right? And we don't necessarily have to worry about where we get the duties or moral obligations. That's a different thing to be concerned with. But what makes an action morally right just is, how well that action fits with what our moral rules are and our obligations to follow those moral rules. So the problem from deontology has to do with natural duties. If I have a natural duty, right, say to another human being, right, and that might potentially be in conflict with a special obligation. So my natural duty to, let's say I have a natural duty not to lie to you, but because you're my best friend, I might have a special obligation to spare your feelings, and then there would be a conflict there. So these duties could conflict. And I'll just tell you what I think about that. Again, I think that there in morality there's room for moral rules for sure, but I'm not entirely sure that deontology is right in general. So I'm not terribly concerned with this potential problem. But here's the thing. And the last one up there could really be problematic from my view. How can you really be friends with companion animals, right? And here's what I have to say about that today, because this is a work in progress. This is something that I'm continuing to think about, and perhaps questions and comments after I'm done talking, will advance things. But if you look at the way people react to the loss of a companion and the grief involved, I think that's a clear indication that, that's one, there are others. But if you just look at the grief involved in the loss of a companion animal, that's enough to say, yeah, that we really can have these friends. And they grieve us. Right, so and I'm not going to lie and say they grieve us as much as I'm not trying to say that they probably don't grieve the loss of us like we grieve them, but it's there. So the friendship, my saying that we have these special obligations based on the friendships that we have with our companions, this is probably the hardest thing that I have to defend. And all I can say today is, if you just look at the way, we act towards our companions when they die, and when they act towards us when we go away, when we die, or go to work, in my case, right? Then, it seems like, yeah, there is a friendship here, a friendship of unequals, right? So, okay, in summary, here's what I think. Animals are our friends, and I think, we're friends to them. Now, if you're still wondering how can we be friends to animals, then we'll talk about that in the Q&A afterwards. But given this relationship, a friendship of unequals, we're obligated to them in special ways that we're not obligated to non-companion animals, right? So I'm obligated, in other words, I'm obligated to my companion animals in ways, and I'll talk about suggestions in a second, that I'm not obligated to, right, the stray animals on my street. Right? Now, it might be a nice thing that I, put food out for them or whatever, but I don't have special obligations to them like I have, right, to my companions. And then this last slide, this is where I said, okay, now this is really where I might get controversial, is this last one, right? And this is really where I think I want to go with this. This stuff up top, oh, sorry for the typo. So this stuff up top, right, is kind of common sense. If you have a pet, companion animal, food, shelter, nurturing, etc. But this last one, right, adequate medical care, including a good death, right? So, right, the reason why I say that might be controversial is that even I've seen people who they love their companions greatly, but they're not willing to, when they're sick and not eating and dying, they're not willing to have them euthanized. And it's hard to do that. I've had to do it in my adult life. It's difficult. I don't want to do it, but I feel like I owe it. And I think more importantly, I think I owe it to these my companion animals. And the reason why I think I owe it is because when I took them on as my animal friends and took responsibility for them, right, I also took responsibility for how they live and ultimately how they die, because they cannot choose for themselves, right? So an animal who is dying, right, cannot choose how it's going to, it can't make that choice. And if I'm in the position to make that kind of choice for my friend, then I would do that. And that's what I've got. Thank you. Yes.
I have a cat, so I guess I'm a cat person. And my cat, conveniently, is a person. And so we get along. I don't know what my feelings are towards her. But I've told her before that I love her, and she meowed and kind of high-fived me with her claws. But I asked my cat if she had read Aristotle, and well, she did actually. She was on exchange in Greece for a year, and she didn't understand Aristotle, but
who does?
Yeah,
I mean, it's really hard at first. Yeah, I had to read the Nicomachean Ethics a few times, right?
But I had
to
a
really
serious
get it.
question for her, and it's the same question I put to you. I mean, can a cat? I think my cat's probably slow or a bad philosopher, but can she have a concept of intrinsic value? And how important is that for your thesis in terms of, I mean, you admit that it's an unequal relationship, but if cats can have all these other things, which I know are controversial, I mean, consciousness and some of the things you point to, which I think are, plausible and defendable, but can they have a sense of value and meaning in a way that would be important for a friendship in the kind of robust way Aristotle laid out for humans?
Yeah, so the first question that you asked, I'm going to say I don't think that my cats and dogs can have a concept of intrinsic value. Now, I don't know about meaning, like exactly what you mean about me. I think I know what you mean by meaning, but, because I actually commented on a paper at a conference about that where the person was making an argument that cats can have meaningful relationships with human beings. And I question that because I don't really know, like when I reflect on what does a meaningful relationship to another human being mean to me, I often don't know that I'm not sure I have a good grasp on what that is. So, I mean, I think I have relationships that are meaningful to me, right? And I look at behavior and I think it's meaningful to the other person, but when I introspect, right, I'm not entirely sure, what it is. I can't necessarily articulate what it is that's meaningful, right? So, but given cognitive limitations, I'm going to go with probably not. But the next question that you asked was how important is it? I don't think it's that important because I don't think that you have to be virtuous to have really, good lasting friendships, right? At least in the Aristotelian sense. You don't have to be that kind of virtuous, right? And so I don't think a lot hangs on that. That just because the cat doesn't have a concept of intrinsic value, right, or can't have it, right? I can't participate in her having a good life, right? So, or him, whatever. But yeah, so that was a good question. I mean, yeah. Yeah.
I'm not too familiar with Aristotle, but I like to distinguish the difference between short-term friendship and long-term friendship. And I'm wondering if a human has a virtuous, the long-term friendship view towards a cat, and a cat presumably only has the utilitarian view because they're getting fed and things like that. How does that how would you say that affects the relationship? Can the human still have the long-term friendship even if it's not reciprocated?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think that a human being can love another human being or love another companion animal for their own sake, right? So I can want the genuine good for my human friends. I can want the genuine, their own good for my animal companion friends, right? But I don't have that. The relationship of unequals, right? I don't have an expectation of getting that back. So, right, it's going to be a long-term relationship provided that I remain the friend to the animal, right, and they remain my friend, whatever that means. So, right, my cat, who didn't like anybody, but she probably liked me, she, I cited, my anecdotal evidence was, look, she never bit me. She never tried to run away. She would sit in my lap, sometimes. She wasn't really a lap kitty. She wasn't very friendly. She was not a friendly cat, but she wasn't aggressive. She didn't, she didn't exhibit behaviors like she was suffering, right? She lived, 15 good years where she always had a place to live, she always had food to eat, she always had toys to play with, and she died a good death, So I look at that like, that's a long-term friendship, right? It was, right, so, and long-term, by the way, long-term friendship, it doesn't mean, that there's some kind of time, if it's 5 years or more, it's a long-term friendship, right? It just means that, that kind of friendship isn't going to end if the situation changes, right? So that friendship that I had with my cat, that I believe I had with my cat, right, wasn't going to end if I moved to a different city or, right, if I got a different job. And so to answer your question, just because it's not reciprocated, I don't think that does anything. But one more thing, and then, because that was a really good question. One more thing. Veterinarians, when they have to put animals down, have to face that. So that story that I told at the beginning, right, about my vet friend who had to put the large dog down because the family was moving and they just didn't want to move the dog anymore. Yeah. And veterinarians have to deal with that. Now this is Oklahoma, and I don't know if they have like laws on here, right? But in Oklahoma, they had to do it. They, presumably somebody could have said no, but this is the vet med school, and they can't turn a lot of people away. But that's not a friendship, right? The situation changed, right? But right, the person who could make the decision, right, changed, they ended the friendship by having the animal euthanized, right? But so that's not what I'm talking about, right? That's the last thing I want to say. There's a really good question. Ian, and then okay.
Is friendship actually possible between unequals? When there's a distribution of the power relationship, how is it possible for the two organisms to maintain what's called a friendship? My understanding of friendship is that it's an exchange between and among equals.
Right.
Within slavery, it was thought that the Africans and the Europeans were friends. How is that possible? The same situation exists for humans and animals.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. I'm going to try to answer it and appeal to these conditions on friendship, because right, the requirement isn't that the feelings be reciprocal, but that they be mutual, right? So.
But the feelings you say, I don't think humans don't have the same feelings. How do we know this?
Right. Well, we appeal to behavior, right? And then, right, the recent science, right, with brain scans on dogs, I had it up there a minute ago. Like, there's the recent science, right, shows, right, that animals do have these responses in their brains to, the things that we say to them and the way that we say these words, right? So your question is, how can unequals be friends? And I think that in some situations, you're right, they can't be friends, right? I think you're right. But in some situations, they can. So in a way, a father can be a friend to his son, right? Okay, all right.
And here's why. Because the father has to be the mentor. The father has to make decisions for a son that the son objects. The father has to have knowledge and embrace it, and he's got to apply it. And he's got to apply it even upon the objections of the son. So if he's his friend, then father's looking to see to it that his son maintains his friendly relationship with him, when sometimes it's essential that the father
Right.
separates that.
Yeah, no, that's right. And similar, the analogy, that analogy holds for animals. I have to make decisions for my companion animals that they would not choose for themselves, right? When I have them spay or neutered, right, for example, or right, then right, that's a choice that I'm making for them that they would not choose for themselves, and would, when I take them to the vet, they object. They don't want to go to the vet, right? So that's a great point. But I'm saying that, in a way, these unequals, we can be friends. I agree with you. This might just be something where we have to disagree. I agree with you that sometimes a father, right, has to be, right, can't be a friend, right? But I think that relationship, the nature of the relationship includes friendship. And then also, like human to animal, that too can include friendship, right? I have to make decisions for my non-human companions, right, that they can't make for themselves, that they wouldn't make for themselves, right? But right, that relationship includes the concept of friendship.
But the difference between a father and son relationship is that the son becomes a man, and once he's a man, he doesn't have to adhere to his father's instructions anymore. The animal never does.
Right, that's right. And
So
so,
the animal is forevermore subordinate.
okay, yeah, but again, I think that we can, within that relationship, right, that we can have friendship, right? It's not going to be like a human-human friendship, but, there can be, yeah, friendship. So, thank you. Okay, Ian first, and then, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I'll sort of follow up on that. So you've kind of chosen friendship as the sort of overarching, it's not a metaphor, but it's the sort of the framework that you're using to capture a relationship with companion animals. And I just wonder if it wouldn't be better to use a framework more like a parent-child relationship, and maybe that's a better model of how we should be related to companion animals and what our obligations might be. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So I've got a dog, and the dog's, frankly, the dog is an asshole. So, I would say I don't really have positive attitudes towards the dog, and yet I feel an obligation towards this animal, essentially because, I adopted it, right? And so because I adopted it, regardless of what positive feelings I have towards the dog, I feel that I have these obligations. I've got to care for the dog, make sure he's fed, make sure he has a shelter, adequate medical care, and whatnot. And that seems to me to be closer to a kind of, like I said, a parent-child attitude rather than a friendship attitude. And then just the last thing I would add is that I often refer to my companion animals, and I think a lot of people see companion animals as a kind of a surrogate infant, a surrogate child.
Fur babies, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious why not that framework, and then just kind of following up on what the gentleman was saying, it does seem to me, though again Aristotle wants to call a kind of parent-child relationship a kind of friendship, I'm not sure, especially in our kind of modern understanding of what friendship is, I'm not sure that quite works as well, given our standards of understanding of friendship and also our understanding of our modern understanding of kind of parent-child obligations and
Yeah, that's a good point. So parent-child obligations. Yeah, see, I'm going to have to think about that because, I still think I'm going to have to think about why, parents and parents and children, why we can't call that a kind of friendship. Like what I'm still, I understand the mentor, right? I understand that, and that's right. But I also think that could include the notion of friendship. So I'm not really sure. I think your point's really good. I was thinking about bringing that up in my talk about fur babies, and and making that a point that, I look at the care that I have to give my companion animals as an extension of care I would give to children. So. Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm going to have to just think about that more. I prefer this model of friendship mainly because I think of them more as, friends, right? But I don't know, maybe that's wrong-headed. So, yes.
Yeah, commenting on both of the prior speakers, I think the father-son relationship exactly matches almost everything you have up there. And most importantly, including even when the son disagrees with what the parent wants for him or her, the idea that you want their good for their own sake is an extremely important aspect. So even when you say to a child, I'd rather you didn't ride a motorcycle. I mean, sure, they want to, but
Yeah, right.
you know, for their own sake, maybe that would be a good idea to forbid it.
Right.
So I see no problem at all with calling a father-son relationship a friendship, even though there is an imbalance of power, because both can recognize each other's goodwill, both can recognize wanting to spend time together, special concern, positive attitudes, causal interaction, it's all there.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So but one difference that may be salient is that in friendships, most of the time, if we think about non-parent-child relationship friendships, right, you choose to be friends with each other, right? There's some choice, and maybe this is a difference that between the human parent-child relations is that, and this is I'm going to have to think about. There's no choice, right? They don't. Parents, don't choose. Well, I mean, they choose, but children don't choose their parents, right? So parents choose, but children don't choose. So I'm gonna have to think about that. But thank you. I mean, that's a good point. I think that's right. But I'm gonna have to think about this objection.
And let me add to that. Maybe by 12 or 13, even the children choose whether they want to be friends with the parent or not.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, yeah.
Even legally, it's gonna be
I saw some students. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say also that for friendship, you can have the option of liking someone rather when it's your father or mother. You're like, even if you don't like them, you live with them, they feed you and stuff. So I think I like how they said that. To me, an animal relationship with a human is more like a mother-child kind of relationship. I mean, I have a Chihuahua. They don't like people, and she's really lovely. I mean, she'll go look to my room and look for me, and then she'll lay in bed with me. And if like a stranger comes or something, they'll like try to eat them. But if like the stranger feeds my Chihuahua, she'll be sweet until they come back again. She'll hit them again.
Yeah. So she's really fickle, right? Is the point? Yeah. So she's really fickle, and she's not a very good friend, right? So yeah. All right. I saw your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Just the issue about the relationship between the parents and the child. The father-son relationship is an unequal relationship, unequal distribution of power, until the son becomes of legal age. And then the son's independent. He's his own person at that point. It likely then is possible for them to form a friendship.
Right.
But it's because they have freedom. They both are free to determine that they want to maintain closeness or they can go their separate ways. Animals don't have that.
The issue is choice, right? Animals cannot choose, and so and that's what I'm going to have to think some more about, because I was starting out with the assumption that there's potential for unequals to be friends in this broadly construed sense. So I'm going to have to work on that.
But
You're right.
It seems to me to be a condescending relationship and that's unequal. I remember from my old days, some of my college mates talking about slumming. We lived on the campus, and sometimes they'd leave the campus and they'd go to different communities in the city. And when they came back and we were drinking, they called it slumming. They went slumming.
Yeah.
But these were with people.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Did you sign in? Make sure if you're going to
So the
leave.
relationship was unequal.
Yeah.
And although these were all people, all of adult age, still there was a condescension. There was not the equality in status.
Right.
The equality of opportunity. And so there was not the possibility to be friends.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, because I just wanted to say, coming from, my own experience, my dad with me and my brothers, he specifically told us, I want to be your friend. I want to, make sure you can trust me and talk to me the way you would talk to your friends about whatever it is you want to talk about, right? And, I'm saying this because all of us had to have drank some point before 21. We all have to have done that. And so my dad's feel comfortable if you want to drink, I want you to not have to sneak behind my back. If you do, just,
Okay.
do it in front of me. That's the kind of friendship that I guess it depends on the parent too. If they want to have that strict kind of be like, don't look at me as a friend, I'm your dad.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Because me personally, with my uncles, aunties, or any cousins that are older than me, I always tell them age does not define experience, so don't ever look down on me.
Okay. So do you think that unequals can be friends? Do you think unequals can be friends?
Well, the respect, like, because I guess, I don't know if I'm right, but I heard that it was scientifically proven that boys tend to be more closer to their mother and vice versa to girls with their father.
Okay.
So, you know, I'm not sure on that point, but my mom is the one figure that I'll never see myself in her status. I'll always, like, you know, feel
Okay.
to her bosom instead of to her face.
Okay, I gotcha. Okay, so we're not sure. All right. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I want to make sure students get to ask. So, did you have a question?
Just to feed off everything, like, how you said that, like, a parent raises a child and then the difference between a pet or companion is
Right.
that the child leaves. Well, I have 2 siblings that my parents adopted, which also you say, you know, the parents are choosing the pet, well, my parents choose who they adopted, so it's kind of the same sense. But 2 of my adoptive siblings are never going to be able to leave my parents' house because they aren't able to take care of themselves. So I don't think that the purpose of raising a child is to put them out in the world and send them on their way. In my family, it's to raise a child to be the best that they can be, help them provide. Same with an animal, they can't get things for themselves. So that's what a parent is for, but same with friends. I've had friends help me through my life. My mom, I would say, is my best friend. I had my first drink with her. She's who I talk to about everything. We go everywhere together. I don't think that being a disciplinary person makes you not a friend. Even when I was younger, you know, I'm not gonna take you to that party because I don't wanna get in trouble or something.
Yeah.
There's always gonna be somebody that's superior in a different situation, even boyfriend, girlfriend. You know, the girls always win, they say, like, the arguments, like, someone's always gonna be superior no
Yeah.
matter what the conflict or situation.
Well, thank you. That's a good point. You know, just to be clear, so the objection that I've got to deal with is really what it is that how can unequals be friends, right? This idea that, you know, if there's a relationship of superiority, one is superior to the other, then, right, any relationship like that, you're going to have a problem because there's an imbalance of power, right? So the objection goes, well, given that imbalance of power, you're not really friends because the person in power makes all the decisions, and it's only until, right, that there's equality that you can really be friends, right? So I'm going to have to address that. I mean, I thank you for your comment, and I agree with you, but I mean, it's a real thing that I have to consider from my view. There are overlapping common intuitions about what counts as a friend. And those are some good things, but not necessarily, right, that none of those are necessarily the be-all, end-all, or what makes a friend a friend. And so, you know, I really do have to deal with that issue of, like, the issue of unequals. I was starting from the assumption that it is possible, but that's a really good point, that unequals, it's you know, unequals, given the nature of the power imbalance, that, you know, unequals may not really be friends. Okay, I saw some more hands. Students who haven't said anything. Yeah, what do you want to say?
I think she covered a little bit of it, but would you say there's a significant difference between companionship and friendship? As in, you could have a companionship, but not truly a friendship?
Well, yeah, no. I mean, so the word companion, I think, comes from the Greek, to break bread, right? So I don't think so. I mean, I think that, you know, that you can probably use them, you know, interchangeably, or companions are subsets of friends. You know, they're the ones that you're physically the closest to, you know, a companion, or I'm going to say physically close to. I don't think there's much difference between, like, a friendship and a companionship. If you're a companion, then you're a friend, right? So
Well, there's also people who are, I mean, like, one of those friendships of convenience. You know, people like, say, 2 police officers are partners, or people who are kind of forced together by circumstance, who didn't necessarily choose each other, but have to work together and build some sort of relationship.
yeah. So friendship, yeah. So I had up there a friendship of utility.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but no, that's good. Yeah. So that might be a friendship of utility where, you know, they have to work together, and so they have to cooperate, and that's a, you know, yeah. So, and then we have those kinds of friendships, you know, that everybody does, right? but that's not the kind of relationship that I want to say that our companion animals have with us, and we don't have that with them. There's a difference, and I didn't say this earlier, but I'm also, drawing a distinction between like service animals and companion animals, because they can be the same, but not necessarily the same, right? And I wanted to just talk about this concept of companion animals because, right, I might have an obligation. So if I have a special obligation to my companions to see them through their lives and give them a good death, then, right, I might have that obligation to companions, but I don't have it to a service animal, right? So people who use service animals, right, I'm not saying that, so service animals are different because sometimes the people that use service animals, once the animal can no longer do what it's supposed to be doing, they can't support the animal anymore. So what happens in those cases is that they typically send them to their like adoption agencies and they'll adopt out. So I know this, my brother was blind, and so blind people will, once the guide dog can no longer guide accurately because they lose that ability, they reach a certain age where they're not very good guides anymore. They a lot of blind people just simply can't afford to keep a guide dog that guides and a guide dog that doesn't. They can't keep two dogs. So they'll often, right, turn the dog over back to the organization where they got the dog, and then the dog will be adopted out. So that's a little bit different, right? I might.
It's almost like a friendship utility.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that would be the utility relation.
Right.
Yeah, that would with animals, right? So they're right. Yeah, good. Okay, Waverly.
Okay, so thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I'm curious if there's implications in your argument that we've created a hierarchy where you have the special obligation to a companion animal, and therefore we have no obligations to strangers who are humans.
Okay,
If
so
you want to like touch on that and sort of see.
yeah. So is the question am I saying is the question that you're asking this? Am I arguing that our special obligations somehow overrides obligations that we have to human strangers?
Because they're not friends.
Because they're not friends, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a really good question that I was afraid somebody was going to ask me. But anyway, but I'll do my best to answer it because it's a hard one to answer. And I'm going to be honest here, and I hope I don't alienate anybody. I'm going to have to think this through though a little bit more. But my intuition really is that if there's a situation where I have to make a split-second decision, save the companion, save the human, I'm probably going to save the human. Even though I love my companion, I still think I want to save the human before I save the companion, right? And then, I hope I didn't, alienate anybody here, but that's I'm sure a lot of people share that intuition, but like that would be. So my answer to you is no. I'm not trying to say that's an implication of it. That's not where I want to go with it. It may be it may be a hole in my position here.
It's a practice though, that it's true, right? I mean, people will care more about their pets
Right.
than they will for their neighbor.
Sure. Well, sure, yeah. So, right, my special obligation to my companion animals, right, keeps me from, this is part of the utility, the problem from consequentialism. It keeps me, the money that I put into my cat's health care doesn't go to help the homeless people, right, that I don't know, right? And so I'm being impartial, right? I'm not putting that money towards helping other human beings. And I don't think that's a problem because we make the same kinds of there's intuitive judgments about our own children. So the money that I put into the well-being of my children, so right, I put money into their schooling or whatever, clothing or food or whatever. That doesn't go to children who need that money more than, say, my children. So I think that that's fine. We have, just like you have the special obligation to, right, the child, you have the special obligation to the companion animal, and it's not a problem that you're just not helping the stranger. But in the fire, you know, like I always used to say to my students, you know, in a fire, you know, and I have to choose. It's unfortunate, it makes me really sad, but I'm going to choose the human, you know, and I don't know that that's consistent, you know, but that's what my gut says, so, yeah. Okay, who else? Okay, I'm sorry, yes.
That's right. I have a question about adequate medical care.
Yeah.
That has to do with a true story, and I just want to get your take on it. I had a rich friend whose children had a pet chicken. And the chicken became ill such that the veterinarian said it needs surgery. That's going to cost you a couple $100. The wife said, you will spend the money and have the surgery on the chicken.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the chicken died on the operating table.
Right.
My friend was very distraught at having to spend hundreds of dollars on the surgery, which was in the end unsuccessful anyway, but that's not the point. But he was distraught about having to spend that kind of money on the pet, and thought that, you know, it shouldn't happen. And I just wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, so that's a really good question to ask about. You know, what counts as adequate medical care, and you know, you're talking to somebody who's been in that kind of situation where it put a lot of money into something that didn't get fixed, right? Because a lot of veterinary medicine is there's a lot that's experimental, and you know, it's expensive, and the cat who I was referring to, her name's Lucy, right? So when Lucy, she died this time last year, and I had her euthanized. I sunk about $600 into, you're preaching to the choir. Okay, I sunk about $600 in ultrasounds, and you know, trying to figure out what was wrong with her. And the vet finally said, at the vet hospital, you know, the specialized vet hospital said, you know, we don't know, you know, but she's, you know, she's not doing well now, you know, and it was, you know, so you know, you're talking to somebody who thinks that, yeah, you know, if you can afford it, then do it. But I don't think you're necessarily, look, if that money, that $200, right, meant they can't pay the rent, right, I'm not sure that that's the right thing to do, right? For a kid, it might be the right thing to do, right? So if you have to spend the $200 on a human child, right, it might be the right thing to do to forego the rent, right, that month to save the child. But for the dog, I mean, I'm not sure that that's the right thing to do. And so, yeah, but it goes back to that inequality, right, of humans and animals. So notice I didn't make the argument from equality, which is an argument that a lot of people, when you talk about ethical treatment of animals, they want to argue from equality, right? You know, I'm trying to do it without that, and so that might be why, you know, there are so many problems. I'm trying to get around that. So anyway, that's a good question. Okay, I saw your hand up.
I just wanted to respond to like earlier comments and kind of defend I think friendship is a better like term to label the relationship between animals and humans than like parent-child would be, because one, I think like thinking of animals as a child kind of like it takes away like the idea that it can make its own decisions, and that it like also views the relationship, like values the relationship as well, and it ignores the fact that like we domesticated animals, like we're not we're not enslaving them or something, and two, they have their own like family structure or something that we took them out of, and I think that we did that to have a more equal relationship, not because we think we're better at raising them than their own like natural like family within their species would be, but because we value like the mutual friendship.
Okay, so given that we've domesticated some of these animals, so I'm trying to summarize like your comment, given that we've domesticated some of these animals, and given that we also take them in as are you saying that we enter into like a contractual relationship with them?
I guess I'm saying, I think
Or-
domestication is different than raising a child because we're doing it not to raise them in a way that I don't think would be better than what they would experience naturally. We're doing it to have like, I guess like a higher level relationship, one based on like friendship and companionship rather than just raising them.
Okay, so the benefits that they get out of having this relationship with us gives them better lives than they would have if they just didn't have these relationships. Is that kind
Yeah,
of what you're
if they were just having
Okay.
a parent-child relationship, they have a natural mother and father, which humans are not.
Okay, so, and, right, the benefits that we give them in having these relationships with them, right, outweigh whatever benefits they're gonna get on their own. Is that kind of the idea? Okay, that's an interesting idea. I'm gonna have to think about that. Thank you for your comment. All right, anybody else? Nina?
Okay.
All right.
Oh, this is fun. Because of your comment, I was thinking there are other patterns to the relationship between humans and companion animals than the mother-child or father-son or parent-child, whichever we prefer. And I was thinking, my husband grew up with a dog, and that dog lived until I guess he was 15, so wonderful, wonderful long life. And my dog grew up with that dog as a, my husband, my husband grew up with that dog as a brother. And he thought of the dog when he was a child, he thought of the dog as a brother. And then the dog got older, and of course he got older, and eventually the dog was put down, which was very traumatic. So, but it was not his responsibility to do it. And at that level, and of course not necessarily what children experience would be the model for adult type relationships, but he still experienced his relationship with the dog as an equal. And that in that case, there's friendship. Definitely, we can check all of those. But he didn't have an obligation to take responsibility for it. So I'm seeing several levels of these relationships that I think definitely, if you grew up in a family and the cat or the dog is not your responsibility, it could be your best friend in life. And then you leave home and you're losing a friend. And maybe you'll never see that pet again, and it's terrible. But you didn't have to take responsibility for the dog's or the cat's well-being. So there's the friendship, there's the mutuality, and the animal probably just wanted to hang out and wasn't depending on you for food either. So some kind of emotional connection that does not involve utility at all and does not involve obligation at all. Then we've got the parent-child kind of relationships, which would have to be uneven.
Yeah.
And a certain kind of friendship, yes. But in that case, I would rather use another term, and you used it earlier, and I hate to channel female stereotypes, but you said love.
Yeah.
And that word has kind of sort of disappeared in the context. But the love that a parent has for the child does not have to be reciprocated in the same way for it to be enormously binding and an enormous obligation.
Yeah.
So that kind of, and of course we can call it, I don't know, of course it's non-sexual love, so that kind of a parent love, or another kind of responsibility towards somebody who cannot take care of themselves, which again, like you mentioned, does not have to end with the child growing up and leaving.
Yeah.
So several types of connections to pets.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, the last quotation, so we went through the I kind of explained what these quotations were on the handout, and then below that, right, so the Rollin quotation, I'm not going to read it to you. That's an ethicist out of Colorado State, Bernard Rollin, and that's what he thinks about the relationship. And then the next guy, Garbarino, he's a psychologist out of Loyola. And then the last one is Conrad Lawrence, and I don't know, some of you may know who he is. He's dead now, but he's he's an animal scientist. I think he actually started ethology, right? And he talks about the love between, he quotes Nietzsche, that let it be your aim always to love more than the other, never to be the second, right? And he says that with his dog, he's always the second. His dog loves him more. And so right, this last quote is about, from the animal scientist, right, about love and this love that he felt for these dogs that he had in his life. But yeah, that's a good point. But again, I think I'm going to have to deal with that issue of can and equals really love, right? So, because of the imbalance of power, and I was making the assumption, I'm not backing down, but I mean, it's really something I have to think about is like, I was making the assumption that, yeah, there is a kind of love between, okay, yeah, there is a kind of love between unequals. But, given the nature of the imbalance of power, is that really love? And I'm going to say yes, but I'm not going to defend it very well. So yeah, but thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, anybody else? Well, I have to say I really appreciate you coming, and this was good discussion, and I thank you very much. So.